Get out of here, right now, before I have you removed. Sir, I'm here for the party. This is the private entrance. People like you are not allowed near this door. If you'd like to check the list, my name should be there. The guard stared at him with open contempt. The list doesn't have room for black men like you pretending you belong here. He stepped forward, his face hard with disgust, as if something unwelcome had crossed onto the polished marble entrance he believed he controlled. Then a white couple approached from behind. No invitation was shown, no name was requested, no identification was checked. The velvet rope was lifted immediately. The black man, standing outside, didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stayed where he was, calm, steady and silent, while people along the sidewalk watched. The two security guards had no idea that the man they had just humiliated was Malcolm Carter, the founder and chief executive officer of the company that employed them. And what followed would do far more than end two careers. It would expose a pattern, shake an entire organization, and force people with real power to decide what accountability was supposed to look like. Earlier that day, Malcolm sat in the corner office of a downtown Chicago high-rise. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city below into a moving miniature. Taxis slipped between intersections. Joggers followed the river. Construction cranes moved slowly against the pale sky. His office was quiet. No music, no television. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the light tapping of his fingers against a laptop keyboard. On the screen was the latest earnings report for Sentinel Crest Security Group. Annual revenue had crossed $850 million. The company held contracts across more than 200 hotels, corporate campuses, and event venues in 18 states. More than 12,000 employees depended on its payroll. Malcolm had built all of it. Every contract, every expansion, every dollar of growth. Hun hadn't inherited a company. He hadn't married into wealth. He had started as an overnight security guard at a warehouse on the south side of Chicago when he was 19 years old. One post, one flashlight, one minimum wage paycheck. Years later, he owned the largest black-founded private security company in the country. But if someone passed him on the street, they might never guess it. I didn't wear a Rolex. He didn't chase designer suits. He didn't travel with an entourage. That day, he wore a navy polo shirt, clean khaki pants, and brown leather loafers. The only thing on his hands, besides his skin, was a simple wedding band made of white gold, lightly scratched from years of wear. On the desk beside him sat one framed photograph. Not an award, not a magazine cover, not a photograph with a politician or celebrity. It was his late mother, Evelyn Carter, wearing a wide-brimmed church hat and smiling. She knew something beautiful she had never needed to explain. Malcolm closed his laptop and leaned back. That evening, he was expected at the annual luxury hospitality gala inside the Belmont Grand Hotel, one of Chicago's most recognizable landmarks. The hotel rose high above the city in classic Art Deco style, with marble lobbies, crystal chandeliers, and the unmistakable atmosphere of old money. The gala was invitation only. Hotel ownership groups, management companies, and major business partners gathered there to shake hands, drink champagne, exchange polished compliments, and pretend there had never been tension behind any contract negotiation. Malcolm was attending because Sentinel Crest held the master security and staffing contract for the Belmont Grand's parent company, Crestline Hospitality Holdings. The deal was worth $120 million. Malcolm had negotiated it himself, line by line, clause by clause. He could have sent one of his executives in his place. He could have called the hotel and asked for a private arrival, a reserved vehicle lane, or a small welcoming committee. But that wasn't how Malcolm operated. He picked up his phone and called Serena Vega, Sentinel Crest's chief legal officer. "Serena, I'll be there this evening. Don't announce me." There was a short silence on the line. "You know, most of the security team at that hotel has never met you in person, right? They don't know what you look like." Malcolm smiled. "Good, Malcolm," Serena said, already knowing where his mind had gone. "If they only respect me after somebody announces who I am." Malcolm replied, "Then that tells me everything I need to know about the people we're trusting with our name." She ended the call, slid his laptop into a leather messenger bag, took one last look at his mother's photograph, and walked out. Across town, the Belmont Grand was preparing for its biggest social event of the season. The lobby glowed beneath crystal lights. Fresh, flowers, covered tables, and marble stands. A jazz trio warmed up near the fountain, waitstaff in black vests polished champagne glasses until they caught the light like diamonds. Outside, at the private entrance, two men stood behind the velvet rope. Preston Hale was the head of the on-site security detail. I was a white man in his mid-50s, with a military build, a sharp crew cut, and the rigid posture of someone who enjoyed being obeyed. Han had worked that entrance for years. Years of standing at the same door, years of checking names, years of deciding who walked inside and who stayed outside. Hein told himself he was protecting the hotel's standards. The truth was, he liked the power. Beside him stood Bryce Nolan, a white man in his late 20s who had joined the detail recently. Bryce laughed at Preston's jokes. He copied Preston's posture. He repeated Preston's opinions. He rarely questioned anything. If Preston moved, Bryce followed. I wasn't so much a partner as a shadow wearing the same badge. A short distance away, Jamal Pierce worked the valet stand. Jamal was a young black man in his early 20s. He didn't say much, but he noticed almost everything. She'd seen Preston turn away black guests before. The explanation changed from one incident to the next. Wrong dress code, reservation missing, computer problem, private event. The details shifted, but the pattern did not. Jamal had also seen Latino guests redirected or questioned in ways white guests rarely were. Most people didn't complain. They absorbed the embarrassment, turned around, and left. That night, Jamal had a feeling something was going to happen, and had no idea how far it would go. Malcolm arrived in a modest black sport utility vehicle. No limousine, no chauffeur. He parked the vehicle himself a few blocks away, beneath a streetlight that flickered over the pavement. He stepped into the warm evening air, shut the door softly, adjusted the collar of his navy polo, and placed the strap of his leather messenger bag over one shoulder. The city moved around him. Car horns sounded along the avenue. A food truck on the corner sent the smell of grilled onions and charcoal into the air. Somewhere down the block, a street musician pulled slow, aching notes from a saxophone. It was the kind of sound that made some people stop for a second and breathe. Malcolm kept walking. The Belmont Grand rose ahead of him, like a monument to wealth, all limestone-tinted glass, warm golden light, polished brass, and carefully managed elegance. A red carpet ran beneath the entrance canopy. Black town cars waited at the curb in a perfect line. Valets in white gloves moved from vehicle to vehicle, opening doors and greeting guests, dressed in silk, cashmere, and the quiet confidence of people who were rarely asked to prove they belonged. Malcolm passed the main entrance. He turned toward the private entrance along the side of the building. It was smaller, quieter, and more exclusive. Velvet ropes stretched between gold stanchions. A slim podium stood near the door with a glowing tablet resting on top. The guest list. Preston stood at the front. His uniform was pressed perfectly. His gold badge had been polished until it reflected the chandelier light every time he shifted his weight. He looked like a man who had spent much of his life following orders and had finally found a place where he could give them. Bryce stood beside him with the same crossed arms and the same wide stance, trying to borrow Preston's authority by copying it. Malcolm walked toward the rope. She hadn't even spoken when Preston's hand snapped upward. "Whoa, stop right there." Malcolm stopped. His hands remained loose at his sides. "Good evening, I'm here for the gala." Preston didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked Malcolm over from shoes to face. His eyes started at the brown loafers, moved up the khaki pants, paused on the navy polo, and lingered on everything Malcolm wasn't wearing. No tie, no blazer, no pocket square, no luxury watch. Preston's upper lip tightened. "This entrance is for very important guests only. Gala attendees check in through the main lobby. Go that way." He jerked one thumb toward the corner without really looking at Malcolm, as if sending away someone he had already decided wasn't worth his attention. "I understand," Malcolm said, "but I believe I'm on the private guest list. My name is Malcolm Carter." Preston sighed loudly and turned toward the tablet. He scrolled with one finger, slowly and carelessly, like someone pretending to check while already knowing what answer he wanted to give. What Preston didn't understand was that the guest list was organized by sponsoring company rather than individual surname. Malcolm's name appeared under Sentinel Crest Security Group, the same company that held the hotel's master security contract, the same contract that ultimately funded Preston's paycheck. But Preston never opened the company section. He skimmed the screen for a moment, then looked back at Malcolm. Not here. And I gave one small shrug. Sorry. I wasn't sorry. Malcolm stayed calm. Would you mind checking under the company name, Sentinel Crest Security Group? Preston blinked. His jaw tightened. The expression wasn't surprise. It wasn't concern. It was irritation. The specific irritation of a man who wasn't used to being questioned by someone he had already placed beneath him. I already checked. His voice dropped lower. You're not on the list. Step back. I'm only asking you to look under the company name. And I'm telling you no. Preston stepped closer. Too close. His chest came within inches of Malcolm's shoulder. You are not getting through this door. Not tonight. Are we clear? At the same moment, Bryce moved to Malcolm's right side. It was a flanking position, the kind of tactical movement security officers use when they believe someone may be a threat. Except Malcolm had done nothing threatening. The space around him narrowed. 2 uniformed guards, 1 velvet rope, a glass wall behind him, reflecting the scene back like a stage. Malcolm didn't step forward. Hy didn't step back. He stayed exactly where he was. Then a white couple walked toward the entrance. They were older, relaxed, and dressed comfortably. The man wore a sport coat over an open-collar shirt, no tie, no cufflinks, nothing more formal than Malcolm's clothing. The woman carried a small clutch. They didn't present an invitation. They didn't offer identification. They didn't give their names. Preston turned toward them, and his entire face changed. The hard jaw softened. The cold eyes warmed. A wide smile appeared. Good evening, right this way. Enjoy yourselves. He unhooked the velvet rope in one smooth motion. The couple walked through without slowing down. Preston closed the rope behind them. Malcolm watched every second. His jaw tightened slightly. His fingers curled around the strap of his messenger bag. You didn't check their names, he said quietly. Preston turned back. The smile vanished. Excuse me? You didn't check their names. Malcolm's tone remained exactly the same. You didn't look at the list. You didn't ask for identification. You didn't ask them a single question. You simply opened the rope. Preston's nostrils widened. He stepped closer again. Close enough for Malcolm to smell stale coffee and cheap aftershave. You want to know why? His voice was barely above a whisper. Because I've been doing this job for years. I know who belongs here. I can tell just by looking. His eyes moved over Malcolm one more time. And you don't belong here. Not tonight. Not ever. The words landed heavily. Behind Preston, the private door opened for another guest. Warm laughter drifted outside. Jazz piano. Crystal glasses touching. A woman in a red evening gown passed through the doorway without looking toward the sidewalk. The door closed. And Malcolm Carter, the man who had built the company, employing every guard in the building, stood outside the velvet rope. Blocked. Dismissed. Reduced to an assumption. Bryce leaned slightly toward him with a grin. There's a sports bar nearby. Big televisions, cold beer. Might be more your crowd. You know what I mean. Preston gave a short laugh. Malcolm looked at Bryce. Then Preston. Hy didn't smile. I didn't blink faster. I didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, patient and unreadable. At the valet stand, Jamal had seen all of it. Hy knew Preston's pattern. He remembered a black businessman in a tailored suit being turned away after Preston blamed a system error. He remembered a Latino family with a confirmed reservation being sent toward a service entrance because Preston claimed the main entrance was restricted. It hadn't been. No formal complaints had followed. No investigation had started. People had simply carried the humiliation home with them. But Malcolm was different. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't shouting either. I wasn't performing anger for the crowd. I was standing still, absorbing every word, every decision, every unequal rule as though he were cataloguing the entire encounter. Something about that calm made Jamal uneasy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the camera and began recording. He angled it carefully, so the frame included the private entrance, Preston, Bryce, and the man in the navy polo who refused to disappear. Jamal didn't know Malcolm's identity. Not yet, but something told him the footage might matter. Malcolm remained at the rope. The jazz piano inside shifted into a slower tune. A valet closed a car door behind him. Preston stared. Bryce stared. Neither spoke. They were waiting for Malcolm to leave the way other people had left. Stand there long enough. Look hard enough. Let discomfort do the work. Eventually, the person walks away. That was how it usually ended. Malcolm didn't move. I'd like to speak with your supervisor. His voice stayed low and steady, almost conversational. Preston laughed. It wasn't genuine amusement. It was a short, hollow sound meant to make Malcolm feel foolish. My supervisor. He tilted his head. You're looking at him. I run this detail. Nobody above me is working this entrance. He spread his hands toward the small section of sidewalk and velvet rope as if presenting a private kingdom. So, Whatever you think is about to happen, it isn't. Bryce smiled from the side. You can always call emergency services and tell them you couldn't get into a party. He laughed at his own comment. Preston didn't stop him. Malcolm let the laughter fade by itself. Then he spoke. I'd like to speak with Meredith Sloan, the hotel general manager. That changed something. Preston's expression flickered for a fraction of a moment. The fact that Malcolm knew the general manager's full name put the first crack in his certainty. He covered it immediately. Mrs. Sloan is inside entertaining actual guests. She's not coming out here for someone like... He stopped himself before finishing. Instead, he made a dismissive motion with his hand, as if Malcolm was something that could be brushed aside without words. Then I'll wait, Malcolm said. Something in Preston snapped. No, you will not wait. He closed the distance again. You are going to turn around. You are going to walk away from this entrance, and you are going to stop wasting my time. Do you understand me? Malcolm didn't lean away. Hein didn't shift his weight. He stood with the quiet certainty of a man who knew the concrete beneath him was a public sidewalk. I have every right to stand here, not if I decide you're a security threat. A security threat. Malcolm repeated the phrase without emotion, letting its absurdity remain in the open, where everyone nearby could hear it. That's right. Preston straightened. His voice changed. It became official and rehearsed, the kind of voice people sometimes use when they are about to cross a line and want the line to sound like procedure. I'm going to need to see identification. Malcolm studied him. Do you ask every guest for identification? I'm asking you. Malcolm reached slowly toward his back pocket, making every movement deliberate. I took out his Illinois driver's license and held it between two fingers. Preston grabbed it, examined the license, as though he had already decided it might be false. He tilted it under the doorway light. He ran his thumb across the laminated surface. He flipped it over, then back again. Malcolm Carter, Preston read aloud. Then he read Malcolm's Southside address loudly enough for people nearby to hear. The way, he said, Southside carried more judgment than the words themselves. Han handed the license back without eye contact, holding it between two fingers in an exaggerated imitation of Malcolm's gesture. This doesn't prove anything. Anybody can come up here with a name and identification. That doesn't mean you belong. Then check the list again under the company. I am not checking the list again. Preston's voice grew louder. Several people on the sidewalk turned toward them. A couple walking past slowed down while pretending to look at a phone. What I am going to do is inspect your bag. Malcolm looked at his leather messenger bag. My bag. Hotel policy. Preston clasped his hands behind his back and lifted his chin. Anyone who isn't on the guest list and refuses to leave can be subject to a visual inspection of personal belongings for the safety of our guests. There was no such policy. Nothing like it appeared in the hotel's rules. Nothing like it appeared in Sentinel Crest's security protocols either. Preston had invented the rule in the moment, wrapped it in official language, and delivered it with the confidence of someone who had rarely been challenged. Do you conduct this inspection on everyone who approaches this entrance? Malcolm asked. Preston smiled thinly. I'm conducting it on you. Open the bag or leave. Malcolm held Preston's gaze for a moment. Then he unzipped the messenger bag and held it open. Preston pushed both hands inside. He didn't perform a careful inspection. He rummaged. He shoved Malcolm's laptop aside with his knuckles. He scattered papers. He pulled out a phone charger, looked at it like it might be suspicious, and dropped it back inside. He tugged a leather portfolio halfway out, glanced at it without reading, then shoved it back. When he opened an inner pocket, he pulled so hard that the zipper caught the lining and tore a small section of fabric. I never noticed the documents inside. Documents printed on heavy paper with the Sentinel Crest Security Group letterhead. Documents that would have ended the confrontation immediately if Preston had bothered to read them. Preston stepped back. Then he slowly wiped his palms against his pants as if he had touched something dirty. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement. We're done here. Leave. Malcolm zipped the bag. His hands were steady. His breathing stayed even. But something in his eyes changed. The calm remained, but it became colder and more focused. Hein didn't leave. I took out his phone and opened a message to Serena Vega. Side entrance. Come now. Bring the binder. He sent it. Preston immediately focused on the phone. Who are you texting? Are you calling somebody? If you're planning to cause a scene. I'm not causing anything, Malcolm said. He had to put the phone back into his pocket and looked Preston directly in the eyes. You are. Preston's face reddened. A vein near his temple became visible. Around them, the audience had grown. Hotel guests returning from restaurants. Pedestrians who had stopped walking. Valets from a nearby building leaning against a planter. Some people watched openly. Others held phones low near their waists, quietly recording. A woman approaching the entrance whispered to the man beside her, "What's going on?" Hein glanced at Malcolm. "Looks like someone trying to crash the event. Security is handling it." Preston opened the rope for them with a smile. No names, no identification, no questions. The rope closed again. Malcolm said nothing. Bryce shifted behind Preston. For the first time, uncertainty passed across his face. It was small, uncomfortable, almost invisible. What if we're wrong? The thought appeared and disappeared. Bryce crossed his arms, tighter, and fell back into Preston's posture. Preston felt no doubt at all. Hein believed he was right. Hein believed his experience justified his instincts. Hein believed Malcolm's skin, his clothing, his calmness, and his refusal to accept humiliation were all evidence that Malcolm did not belong. Hein had no idea how completely wrong he was. Then, the private door opened from the inside with purpose. Serena Vega stepped outside. She wore a charcoal suit tailored sharply, with black heels clicking across the marble threshold. A Sentinel Crest Security Group executive badge hung from her neck, the silver company logo catching the light. She carried a tablet in one hand and a leather binder in the other. She didn't look at Preston. She didn't acknowledge Bryce. She walked directly between them, as if they were nothing more than part of the doorway. Then she stopped beside Malcolm. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was clear and professional, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I apologize for the delay. I have your keynote materials and your credentials." Preston blinked. "Mr. Carter." The name seemed to hit him physically. He turned towards Serena. "Ma'am, this man is not on the guest list. I've already—" Serena cut him off. "You've already what?" She faced him, fully. "Harassed the founder and chief executive officer of the company you work for." Preston's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Serena lifted the tablet and turned the screen toward him. Displayed, there was Sentinel Crest Security Group's corporate organization chart. At the top was Malcolm Carter, founder and chief executive officer. His photograph appeared beside the title. The same face, the same calm eyes, the same man standing a few feet away in a navy polo shirt. Preston stared. His lips moved without sound. Serena changed the screen. Now it showed the Crestline Hospitality Holdings master contract, $120 million. The agreement covering security operations across Crestline properties, including the Belmont Grand, including the private entrance, including Preston Hale, including Bryce Nolan. Every uniform, every badge, every radio, every payroll cycle connected to the company whose founder Preston had just refused to admit. At the bottom of the contract was Malcolm Carter's signature. Serena lowered the tablet and allowed the silence to settle. Then she spoke slowly. "This is Malcolm Carter. He owns the company that employs every security guard in this building." She looked at Preston's polished gold badge, "Including you." The color left Preston's face. His shoulders dropped. The hands that had been grabbing identification, digging through personal property and pointing people away from the entrance now hung motionless at his sides. Bryce took 2 steps backward, his arms uncrossed. The grin disappeared completely. He looked down at the concrete as though the pattern beneath his shoes had suddenly become fascinating. Preston tried to speak. "I was only following protocol. We have a dress code. There are procedures. I didn't." Malcolm lifted one hand slightly. Preston stopped. "You didn't check the list properly," Malcolm said. His voice hadn't changed once. "I gave you my name. You didn't look. I gave you my company's name. You refused to check. You took my identification and read my home address aloud, where strangers could hear it. You searched my bag without cause. You allowed other guests through this rope without asking them a single question." He paused. "That wasn't protocol, Preston. That was a choice." Preston's lower lip trembled. His eyes became wet, not with visible remorse, but with fear. "Sir, please, I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Malcolm said quietly. "You didn't know, and you treated me this way anyway. Imagine how you treat people who don't have my title, my resources, or my ability to prove you wrong." Preston had no answer. Malcolm turned toward Serena. "Call Meredith Sloan. I want a meeting in the lobby. And contact our contracts team. I want a complete review of every staffing assignment at this property." Serena nodded and began making the calls. Preston tried once more. "Sir, if you would just let me explain." Malcolm didn't look at him. "I was already walking through the same private door Preston had denied him." Serena held it open. Malcolm stepped inside without slowing down. Behind him, the velvet rope remained open. The crowd on the sidewalk slowly lowered their phones. People stared at one another. Someone whispered in disbelief. At the valet stand, Jamal stopped recording. His hands were shaking. The video on his phone contained the entire encounter. Before the glass door closed, Malcolm caught Jamal's eye. I gave the young valet one small nod. Jamal nodded back. Inside the lobby, Meredith Sloane hurried toward Malcolm. She wore a black cocktail dress. Her face was flushed. Her phone was still in one hand as Serena gave her the facts in short, precise sentences. Meredith found Malcolm seated in a leather armchair beside the grand fireplace. His messenger bag rested on the floor near his feet. His legs were crossed. His hands rested calmly in his lap. He looked like a man waiting for coffee, not a chief executive officer who had just been publicly humiliated outside his own company's contracted event. Serena stood beside him with the tablet open. Meredith stopped in front of Malcolm and swallowed. Mr. Carter, her voice cracked. I cannot begin to tell you how sorry I am. This is completely unacceptable. I had no idea. I know you didn't, Malcolm replied. There was no anger in his voice. There was no warmth either. That's part of the problem. Meredith nodded. Bring them in, Malcolm said. Preston and Bryce were escorted into the lobby by two colleagues from the same security team. Preston looked like a different man. The rigid posture was gone. His shoulders curved inward. The gold badge he had worn with such pride now seemed heavy against his chest. His eyes were red. Bryce walked behind him with his head lowered and his hands in his pockets. Neither man was invited to sit. Meredith stood nearby, with her arms folded and her jaw tight, fully aware that her own oversight was now part of the conversation. Mr. Carter, Preston began. His voice was thin. This was a misunderstanding. You weren't dressed for the event. I was doing my job. I was following procedure I didn't know. You let a white couple through the rope, Malcolm said. Same entrance, same event. The man wore a casual sport coat and no tie. You didn't check an invitation. You didn't verify a name. You smiled at them and waved them inside. Preston said nothing. The only obvious difference between them and me was race, Malcolm continued. And we both know that was the difference you acted on. The lobby became silent. The jazz musicians had stopped playing. Two bartenders stood still behind the lounge counter. A bellhop near the elevator held a luggage cart without moving. Preston stared at the floor. Malcolm turned to Meredith. I want both of them removed from duty immediately. Meredith didn't hesitate. She used her radio and gave the order. Relieve Hale and Nolan. Collect their badges, radios, and access cards. Escort them off the property. Preston looked up in panic. Sir, please, I've worked here for years. I've never had a complaint. You've never been caught, Malcolm said quietly. Preston had nothing to say. Bryce remained silent. Their co-workers stepped forward. Badges were unclipped. Radios were collected. Access cards were surrendered. Then Preston and Bryce were escorted toward the same private entrance they had controlled, the same door, the same rope. They passed through it one final time. The door closed behind them. Malcolm stood. He straightened his polo shirt and lifted his messenger bag from the floor. I'm not making a decision about the contract tonight, he told Meredith. But I want a complete incident report. Every available security camera, recording from the entrance, and written accounts from every staff member who witnessed what happened. Meredith nodded quickly. Absolutely. Whatever you need, I will personally. Thank you, Malcolm said. Then he walked toward the exit. I didn't attend the gala. I didn't drink champagne. I didn't shake hands. I didn't give the keynote speech. Outside, Jamal was waiting near the curb in his valet vest, phone still in his hand. Sir, Jamal said, I recorded everything from the beginning. If you ever need the video, it's yours. Malcolm looked at him carefully. Really looked at him. The way people at that hotel should have looked at Malcolm before deciding anything about him. I extended his hand. Jamal shook it. Keep that footage safe, Malcolm said. It's going to matter. Then, Malcolm got into his black sport utility vehicle, drove away from the curb, and disappeared into the Chicago night. What happened next unfolded like a demolition in slow motion. Sentinel Crest's internal affairs team arrived at the Belmont Grand and collected every available recording from the private entrance. Multiple camera angles showed the same sequence in high definition. Malcolm approaching the rope, Preston raising his hand, the refusal to check the guest list correctly, the demand for identification, Preston reading Malcolm's Southside address aloud, the unnecessary bag search, Preston pushing through Malcolm's personal belongings, white guests being allowed through without questions, Bryce moving into a tactical position, the smirks, the laughter, the unequal treatment. Every part of it had been recorded. But the hotel's own security cameras were not what brought the incident into public view. Jamal's phone video reached the internet and posted the unedited footage to his personal social media account. No caption, no explanation, No attempt to make himself part of the story, just the raw recording. The video spread rapidly. It crossed 50,000 views, then 400,000, then more than 2 million. People reposted it, quoted it, screen recorded it, and shared it across major platforms. A phrase began appearing again and again. Let him in. It wasn't planned by a campaign or created by a public relations team. It came from strangers who had watched a black man be humiliated because of his skin color at a door controlled by employees of the company he owned. Regional news organizations picked up the story first. A local anchor named Natalie Keene ran a segment titled Chief Executive Officer Denied Entry to His Own Company's Event. She interviewed witnesses who had been standing on the sidewalk. She played part of Jamal's video. Then she looked into the camera and said the incident should not be treated as a single bad moment without context. The footage raised questions about whether a larger pattern had been hiding in plain sight. Soon, national news organizations were covering the story. Then the consequences began. Sentinel Crest Security Group formally terminated Preston Hale. The termination letter listed gross misconduct, racial profiling, unauthorized search of personal property, and conduct unbecoming a contracted security officer. Preston's state security license was placed under formal review by the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. While the investigation continued, he was barred from active duty at licensed facilities. Then his past began to surface. Former colleagues came forward and described separate incidents involving Black and Latino guests who had been turned away under Preston's watch. The excuses had varied: computer errors, dress code problems, capacity limits, private event restrictions. None of the incidents had been documented properly. None had led to formal internal investigations. The people involved had simply absorbed the humiliation and left. Now, those incidents were added to the official record. Preston had spent years believing the door was his to control and that his decisions would never be questioned. Now, the same record that had protected his career by staying empty was filling quickly. Bryce Nolan was terminated as well. The stated reason was complicity and failure to intervene. His tactical positioning, his mocking comments, his laughter, and his willingness to support Preston's unequal treatment were all visible on camera. All of it entered his personnel record. Bryce's attorney later released a short public statement. It expressed regret and a commitment to personal growth. It did not contain a direct apology. It did not mention Malcolm by name. The public read it and moved on. Then the legal process began. Malcolm filed a formal civil rights complaint with the Illinois Department of Human Rights. The complaint cited racial discrimination in a public accommodation under the Illinois Human Rights Act. The investigation expanded beyond Preston and Bryce. Regulators began examining Crestline Hospitality Holdings, the company that owned the Belmont Grand, and several other properties protected under the Sentinel Crest contract. The central question was simple. What training, supervision, and accountability systems existed for contracted security employees? The answer exposed another problem. Very little meaningful oversight had been in place. Crestline's board held an emergency meeting. Behind closed doors, executives argued, lawyers reviewed documents, and responsibility moved from one department to another as everyone tried to understand how a failure this obvious had survived unnoticed. The board released a public statement condemning what happened and promising a complete overhaul of security training, hiring, and oversight practices across its properties. Then came the decision everyone was waiting for. Would Malcolm cancel the $120 million contract? Many people expected him to. Social media demanded it. Commentators predicted it. A contract that, large disappearing overnight, would have been a dramatic symbol of punishment and retaliation. Malcolm chose something else. He kept the contract, and he used the leverage inside it to force change. During a meeting with Crestline's board, Malcolm presented a list of conditions that were not open to negotiation. First, every contracted security employee across Crestline properties would receive comprehensive in-person training focused on implicit bias, equal treatment, professional judgment, and de-escalation. Not a quick online presentation clicked through in the background. Real training, repeated regularly and led by qualified instructors. Second, security personnel assigned to guest-facing entrances would use body cameras. Interactions would be recorded and securely archived, so complaints could be reviewed against evidence rather than memory alone. Third, Guests and employees would have access to an anonymous complaint hotline managed independently from the local property staff. Reports would be reviewed by Sentinel Crest's compliance division on a regular basis. Fourth, Crestline properties would undergo recurring audits by an independent civil rights organization. Auditors would receive full access to relevant records. The process would be transparent. The results would be published. Crestline accepted every condition. Malcolm later stood behind a simple podium for a press conference. There was no teleprompter, no notes. I wore the same kind of navy polo he had worn at the hotel. I didn't shout. I didn't perform outrage. I didn't try to turn pain into theater. He spoke plainly. Canceling this contract would punish hundreds of employees who did nothing wrong, he said. Changing the system protects everyone who comes after me. Hum announced that the Sentinel Crest Foundation would commit $500,000 to support bias training programs for security and hospitality workers across the country. The foundation would open the program to qualifying organizations nationwide. The response was immediate. News programs replayed his remark. Messages of support spread online. People wrote that this was what real power looked like. Others said Malcolm hadn't simply won justice for himself, he had used the moment to redesign the system around the next person who might not have his title or influence. In the middle of all the attention came a quieter announcement. Jamal Pierce, the young valet who had pressed record when nobody asked him to, received a full scholarship through Sentinel Crest's Employee Development Program. He enrolled in a criminal justice program at a university in downtown Chicago, the same city where Malcolm Carter had once worked overnight security shifts with a flashlight and a minimum wage paycheck. Much later, Malcolm appeared on the cover of a national business magazine. The photograph was simple. No boardroom, no skyline, no luxury car. He stood on a downtown sidewalk with his arms relaxed at his sides, wearing a navy polo shirt. The headline called him the quiet chief executive officer who changed an industry. Inside, the profile described the Belmont Grand incident, the contract reforms, and the effects that followed. New clients signed with Sentinel Crest specifically because of the company's public commitment to equity and accountability. Revenue climbed. Partnerships expanded. Malcolm's name became associated not with outrage, but with action. He still wore polo shirts to major events. He still drove himself. He still arrived without announcing who he was. When a journalist asked why, Malcolm smiled. The day I have to announce myself just to be treated like a human being is the day I've already lost. Preston Hale's story ended quietly. His security license was permanently revoked after the state investigation. The review included both the Belmont Grand incident and the earlier cases described by former colleagues. Together, they showed a pattern of racial profiling that had survived because people stayed silent and oversight had been weak. Preston later applied to 4 private security companies. All 4 rejected him. His name could no longer be searched without the video appearing beside it. A former colleague told a reporter that Preston had simply never believed there would be consequences. I didn't say it with anger. I didn't say it with sympathy either. Preston eventually moved away from the city. I gave no interviews. I issued no public apology. He faded from the story not because anyone needed revenge, but because the authority he had misused was no longer his. Bryce completed a court-ordered community service program at a non-profit serving young people from underprivileged neighborhoods on Chicago's west side. His attorney confirmed that Bryce had also enrolled voluntarily in a diversity and inclusion awareness course. Whether the experience truly changed him, nobody could say. Bryce stopped speaking publicly about the incident. His social media accounts went quiet. It became another reminder that failing to challenge wrongdoing can carry consequences, even when someone else appears to be leading the behavior. Meredith Sloan kept her job at the Belmont Grand, but only narrowly. She was placed on a formal performance improvement plan and lost important senior responsibilities. The board made the expectation clear. Another major failure of oversight could end her position. To her credit, Meredith changed one practice permanently. During major hotel events, she began spending time at the private entrance herself. She greeted guests personally, regardless of what they wore, how wealthy they appeared, or what they looked like. It was a small change compared with the larger reforms, but it was real. Jamal Pierce continued his education and earned a grade point average of 3.8. He also kept working at the Belmont Grand, but not at the valet stand. I was promoted into a junior management trainee role and became the youngest person in the hotel's history to hold that position. When a classmate asked why he had recorded Malcolm's encounter that night, Jamal thought before answering, because somebody had to. And maybe that is where the deepest lesson in this story begins. Respect should never require a reveal. Dignity should never depend on a business card. Basic decency should not suddenly appear only after someone learns a person's title, salary, influence, or connections. Malcolm should never have needed Serena to walk through that door carrying an executive badge and a corporate binder before the people outside decided he deserved to be treated with respect. The fact that he had to prove who he was just to receive the same courtesy other guests received automatically was never the victory. The victory came afterward when the truth was documented, accountability followed, and Malcolm chose to use his power for something larger than personal revenge. He could have taken satisfaction in destroying a contract. Instead, he asked how the system could be changed, so the next person would not need to be a chief executive officer to be believed. That choice matters. So does Jamal's. I didn't have Malcolm's authority. I didn't know how important the man at the rope was. He simply saw something unfair happening and understood that silence might allow it to disappear. He pressed record because somebody had to. There is also a lesson in Bryce's role. I wasn't the person making every decision, but he chose to follow. He laughed and copied. He helped surround a guest who had done nothing threatening. Sometimes responsibility doesn't belong only to the loudest person in the room. It also belongs to the people standing nearby who know something feels wrong and decide whether to join in, look away, or speak up. And there is a lesson in Meredith's part of the story too. She said she didn't know what was happening at her own entrance. Malcolm's answer was simple. That was part of the problem. Leadership isn't only about writing policies or trusting supervisors. It also means building systems that can reveal what leaders aren't personally there to see. Good intentions without oversight leave too much room for harm to hide. None of this means people should be reduced forever to the worst decision they have made. Accountability and growth can exist together. Consequences matter because actions matter. Reflection matters because people can learn. But growth begins only when someone is willing to look clearly at what happened without hiding behind excuses. Preston kept saying he hadn't known who Malcolm was, but that was never a defense. It was the heart of the problem. He believed respect depended on who was standing in front of him. Malcolm believed respect should come first. That difference shaped everything that followed. So imagine the same night without the reveal. Imagine Malcolm had been an ordinary guest. No chief executive officer title. No $120 million contract. No legal officer carrying proof. No power to order an internal investigation. Would anyone have believed him? Would the bag search have been reviewed? Would the unequal treatment have reached the boardroom? Would anyone have asked what had happened to the people who walked away before him? That question is uncomfortable because it reaches beyond this one story. Most people who are treated unfairly don't have a corporate organization chart waiting behind a door. They don't have reporters calling. They don't have a legal department. Sometimes all they have is their dignity, their memory of what happened, and the hope that someone nearby chooses not to look away. That is why character matters more than status. You never truly know everything about the person standing in front of you. They may be wealthy or struggling, powerful or unknown, an executive or a worker, finishing a long shift. But none of those details should decide whether they deserve courtesy. Skin color doesn't tell you someone's value. Clothing doesn't tell you someone's character. A neighborhood doesn't tell you someone's worth. And a job title should never be the price of admission for basic human respect. Real strength isn't found in controlling a velvet rope. It isn't found in making somebody feel smaller. It isn't found in having the authority to say no simply because nobody has challenged you yet. Real strength is having power and using it responsibly. It's noticing when a rule is being applied differently. It's being willing to question your first assumption. It's stepping in when someone beside you is crossing a line. It's accepting consequences without pretending the harm was only a misunderstanding. And when you do have influence, real strength means asking how you can use it to make the path fairer for people who come after you. Malcolm couldn't erase what happened outside the Belmont Grand. He couldn't erase every similar moment that had happened before it. But he could decide what the moment became. He turned humiliation into evidence. evidence into accountability, accountability into reform, and reform into a chance for other people to be treated better. Jamal turned one quiet decision to press record into an opportunity to protect the truth. Meredith turned a failure of oversight into a reason to become more present. Even Bryce was left with a choice about what kind of person he would become after consequences forced him to examine his own behavior. That is how responsibility works. What we choose in one moment can travel farther than we expect. A dismissive gesture can stay with someone. A cruel assumption can close a door. A quiet act of courage can open one. And sometimes the most meaningful kind of justice isn't the kind that simply removes one person from a job. Sometimes it is the kind that changes the rules, improves the training, creates evidence, opens reporting channels, and makes it harder for the same harm to happen again. If this story made you think, share your answer in the comments. If Malcolm had been an ordinary man with no title, no major contract, and no powerful company behind him, do you believe the outcome would have been the same? And if this story reached something real in you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Subscribe to the channel. If you want more stories about dignity, responsibility, courage, accountability, and the choices people make when nobody expects the truth to come out. Because the person standing in front of you should never have to prove they are important before you decide to treat them well. Character matters, kindness matters, fairness matters, and respect should begin long before anyone learns a name, a title, or who signs the paycheck.